So hi again, everyone. So obviously it's 3 minutes past 4. I can still see a couple of people logging in, but that started to slow down now. I imagine over the next minute or two, a few more people will join us. However, I thought we'd get the webinar underway. First of all, starting just with a few introductions. So myself, my colleague Francisco and Hans. Welcome to SAP Contract Negotiations, Maximising Value from your SAP Agreements. My name is Jan Cook. I'm UK Director for Advisory and Senior Advisor with VOQUZ Labs. Francisco won't be on the webinar today, but he did help me prepare today's webinar content, so thanks to Francisco. He works with me as my Director of Global Advisory, and he helped prepare the content for today's webinar. So thanks to Francisco for his contribution. Delighted to welcome Hans Moerkens of FisherITS, one of our valued partners here in the United Kingdom. So me and Hans will be presenting to you today, and I'll let Hans, over to Hans to let him introduce himself.
Thank you for that, and thank you for having us on this webinar. So yeah, it's not much to say right now. Hi everyone, I am Hans Moerkens. I'm a senior manager in FisherITS and one of the SAP experts there. Carry on, Jan.
Thanks, Hans. So I need to give myself control back, I think. There we go. So a little bit about VOQUZ Labs. We were launched in 1980. We have two software solutions called SAMQ and SETQ. SAMQ is a software asset management tool for SAP, and SETQ is an authorizations, compliance, and security management tool for SAP. So very much an SAP solutions house. Those two are our software products launched in 2010 and 2018 respectively, and today we've got offices all over the world, 400 plus clients globally, and over 300 employees, and very much focusing on SAP related solutions. So there you can see we've got our SAMQ license optimizer for SAP software, and SETQ is our authorization manager for SAP. And we combine that with our advisory practices. So our advisory services, they leverage our SAMQ technology and our SETQ technology for delivering licensing and security related advisory engagements to our customers. If you want to know more about us and to keep up to date with the latest topics on SAP, you can visit our blog at voquzlabs.com/blog. And there you can see various different articles about contract negotiation. For example, as you can see, one of our articles there, preparing a negotiation of an S/4HANA contract, and various other topics. Over to you, Hans. You can tell everyone a little bit about FisherITS.
Absolutely. So yeah, at FisherITS, we do not just specialize in SAP, but are actually what we call 360 items. So we look after the entire life cycle of software within the business, governance, everything so forth. But as part of our advisory practice, we do also do contract negotiation and specialize in several vendors, of course, have expertise in SAP and many others. We've been working at this for quite some time already, and have been slowly growing our practice. Have a team of over 30 people by now, and operate globally pretty much where needed. So if there's any more information needed, you're welcome to reach out as well, of course. So carry on, Jan.
Sure, I actually gave you control, but I'll take it back for the time being. Yes, so VOQUZ Labs, we're primarily a software house, and Fisher primarily an advisory practice or solutions practice. And for SAP, we often team up for customer engagements, where customers can leverage both the expertise of our technology practice and the respective commercial expertise of FisherITS. So welcome you again to SAP Contract Negotiations, maximising value from your SAP agreements. And just to tee up the conversation, I want to look at or discuss some of the negotiation drivers. So what would drive a customer to renegotiate or negotiate an SAP contract? First of all, of course, you've got greenfield customers who would have to negotiate a contract with the vendor. That's new customers to SAP. But the four negotiation use cases, in essence, that we're going to look at today, or that we will be reflecting on as we go through the webinar, would be customers looking to cost save, so negotiating a contract to save money. Maybe the existing cost base is too great. Consolidation of contracts, so that might be mergers, acquisitions and divestments, and to simplify and centralize licensing agreements for the enterprise. Some customers might be facing contract renewal, so that could be customers within a flex agreement period coming to the end of that fixed term, and they face either a flex renewal or flex crystallization, or contract negotiation driven by transformation. So that could be digital transformation, large-scale SAP rollouts and deployments, or most commonly migrating to S4 HANA. So within these use cases, cost saving tends to be relevant to customers who are stable, perhaps over licensed, and they want to reduce their OPEX, which means addressing the maintenance spend, identifying shelfware, disposing of unused license assets, and terminating software products they're not using to try and reduce that overspend or that cost base that's driving IT spend. Consolidation is probably due to change. That could be mergers, acquisitions, or legacy contracts that have old licenses, metrics, or even mixed metrics for various different products that need to be harmonized, and maybe license metrics and contracts and use rights need to be modernized to make them fit for modern day usage. Renewal, like I said, probably a flex agreement period. A customer may need to crystallize after they've come out of that flexible period, and that might involve a true up. So that would involve a measurement of spend versus the flex entitlement, and there might be a true up where the customer needs to buy additional licenses in order to crystallize their bill of material. That's an opportunity to optimize, mitigate risk, and then try and utilize as much flex entitlement value as possible to try and capitalize on the value within that flex agreement before it's crystallized. And we'll talk about that more later on. Transformation, that's kind of S4 HANA driven. Lots of customers looking to migrate, move across to S4 HANA. They'd be looking at contract or product conversion, migration of on-premise solutions to cloud. Again, it's another opportunity to try and get rid of shelfware, modernize agreements, looking at cloud and on-premise product mix, and even address things like digital access. So those are the kind of main use cases. And in fact, I'd like to just do a little poll. So we'll test my poll management skills. So we're going to launch a poll, and we're going to ask which of these use cases, so everyone watching who's interested in understanding how they're going to save money from SAP or how to maximize value from SAP agreements, which of these particular scenarios most suits the situation of your current business. So the poll is now open, and please do let us know what is most relevant to your business. So the answer's literally flying in as we speak. So we've already got 40% voted. So if you haven't voted, let us know what you think. If there's another scenario that doesn't match, you can hit other at the end. Or if it's a cost cutting, you're looking to save money, consolidate agreements, you're looking to
like this,
handle
a lot of HANA.
It is. Yeah. Lots of HANA. So over a third, in fact, it's creeping up even more. Well over a third of customers are looking to negotiate S4 HANA. That's interesting. So still 30% of votes are still coming in. So if you haven't voted, please vote, just to give us a good overall picture of of what people are thinking. So we're at 70% voted so far. Still some votes coming in. So yeah, at the moment, a quarter of all attendees are actually looking to cut costs. Consolidation, that again is very relevant to mergers and acquisitions and having disparate contracts under one enterprise. So looking to consolidate agreements, that's 11%. 10% are within a flex agreement and they have that to contend with. So I'm going to close the poll because most people have voted. We're almost at 90%. So I'll close the poll and I'll bring up the results on screen.
Yeah, looks like we're going to have to pay some special attention to HANA during the deck.
Right. Strangely enough, I can't see the poll results on my screen. Hans, can you see them?
You do not? Yes, I see them fine. Yes. I think it does say.
Right.
Yeah. So I assume everyone can see them, all right?
So obviously, anyone with questions relative to their current situations, so the final results: 40% looking to negotiate, about 40% are looking to S4 HANA, and about a quarter looking to cut costs from their existing cost base. Just over 10% are looking to consolidate SAP agreements. About 10% are currently within a flex agreement period, and we have a flex renewal to face, and 20% with other. If you've clicked other, why not ask us a question? Put a comment in the questions box and let us know what your other relates to. So what situation what kind of bucket would you put yourselves into? So that's a very interesting poll. So Hans, we can focus respectively on those different topics.
Yeah, absolutely.
And over to you, Hans.
All right.
I'll give you control as well. That will help.
Yeah,
there you go.
Absolutely. So yeah, now obviously that was a good overview of why you might be looking into renegotiating your contract. And I think the key lesson is it doesn't matter where you are. There's probably a good reason to do it. If you haven't thought about your SAP contract over the last year and haven't looked into where can you improve things, cost savings, change towards future transformation, there's probably a good reason to pick it up and figure out if there's no opportunity there. Now, how do you approach this in the grand scheme of things? And we've got a basic set of rules that we always use in our work when we try to deliver one of these advisory services. So it really doesn't depend even what vendor you do. There's always 3 steps. One, you want to know your contract. If you do not know your contract in and out, you can't negotiate a new contract. You can't change anything. That's the end of it. 2, you want to know your usage. And it is very important to do that after you know your contract, because figuring out what you're using can often depend on what exactly is in your contract. If you have a particular set of licenses, you want to focus on that and see, all right, if we move that somewhere else, obviously you could change that, but knowing your usage is key. And then 3, something that you can't really prepare for too well, except if you know the vendor is actually be prepared for SAP or the vendor that you're trying to negotiate. Know what you want, know how you try to get there, what your goals is, and to be prepared is usually, especially for a vendor like SAP, you want to start even half a year in advance. If you don't have half a year, start as soon as possible. Let's see. Yeah. So first of all, how do you figure out an SAP contract? What is going on there, and how can you get the better of SAP through that? So I don't know if this slide, yeah, there we go. So an SAP agreement, and this might be basic, so I assume a lot of you might be aware of this already, but it's always good to revisit the basics just to make sure that we're not missing anything and that there could be very bits in there. So as in principle, you've got 2 types of SAP agreements, which is one is on-premise, the perpetual, the classic agreement, the one which is probably a folder with about 100 documents on your desktop somewhere. And then on the other end, you've got the newer agreement style, the cloud services, which is a subscription model. Now, I would say that in most of our clients will have at least one of these agreements with SAP. But beyond that, what we do see, and something you shouldn't forget, is that there might be a lot of other legacy agreements. What usually happens when SAP has purchased one of their companies like Business Objects or Hybris or several other in their history, is that they will just adopt the old contract. They won't really change this. Sometimes they bring it over into their main agreement, but often you will keep that old agreement. Specifically for business objects, we usually find agreements that have been that are already decades old and that are still in the old POJ wording. So carrying onwards, and let's see. Oh, yeah, we've got the SAP agreement on-premise first. So first of all, what you need to realize is that an SAP on-premise agreement is usually contained in one massive agreement. So it's not like you're like with most vendors, or like say for Microsoft, where every 3 years you negotiate a new agreement, new enterprise agreement. You can forget about it. You can dump everything that you negotiated before that because it's usually not really relevant anymore, except for bits. For SAP, that's not the case. Everything that you negotiate, whether it was 10 years ago, 20 years ago, even more than that, it could still be relevant today. And usually it will just keep stacking up. And the way they do it is that they have their base agreement, so the general terms and conditions, which will be a boring text full of legal bits and pieces that people might have forgotten about, that will be out there somewhere in the drawer. And this is the first thing you would agree, and everything else you attach on it. You will attach in order forms, exhibits, appendices, amendments. The naming of these documents has changed through the ages. But every time you have one of these new agreements, it gets attached. And it could be that order form number 20 will change something in order form number 3, and we'll say, hey, that line is now a different line. Or even in the base agreement, it could be, as I said, that audit clause in your base agreement. So some of these important bits or the privacy terms or something, that you change that in document number 50. So it's very important that when you're negotiating SAP, that you realize that you're not just negotiating your last order, you're not negotiating your last 10 order, you're negotiating that entire on-premise agreement that you've been built up, that your predecessor might have started. Maybe there's already been 5 people in between that have started this agreement and picked it back up. And it will be the same at SAP. So the people that you're negotiating with SAP right now probably weren't there when they first signed that agreement, when it was 5, 10, 20 years ago. So one thing to always keep in mind, we've got one link there about what the current general terms and conditions, but practically, and remember that because it's very important for SAP, your contract always governs over online terms. So anything, doesn't matter what you find online, don't trust that it's true for you. Always look in your own contract, because that's going to be the one that's valid. So moving on. So how do you have the SAP agreement? What is it built of? And the interesting part, what most people look at, is the one-time license fee. So if you're negotiating a new contract, you've got that, all right, this is the price you do. It's very difficult to benchmark this as well, because one of the best kept secrets in SAP is their price list. They will claim that, oh yeah, we do this because not every environment is different and we can't really compare. That's all nonsense. The only reason they do this is to make sure that you can't benchmark their pricing. And you can't check whether or not other customers get a different pricing. Every other vendor somehow can publish their price list, but SAP, for some reason, they refuse to have any price list out there. Even going as far as putting it in your contract to say that it is purely confidential, you can't even share it with consultants. There is methods around that and interpretations around that, but practically they will often put that in there to just to keep those prices secret. And because those prices are not available, they always give you a very heavy discount as well and claim that it's one of the best they will ever give. But of course, you can never compare that because it's not official. So you don't even know if your base price was the same as for another client, never mind knowing what your discount was. Besides the software license, there's another key component in your contract, and it's also something that's often missed, and that's the database part. Every big ERP system has a third-party database initially, and nowadays there's a big shift from SAP towards HANA. And do keep in mind, because it's something that I found confusing initially as well, and I think a lot of other people, there is a difference between HANA and S4HANA. HANA is their database, they published it, it was quite successful, and I think it is quite a good product in its own right. But then at some point they were like, oh, we need a new full name for our ERP system, so they decided to move from E3 or R3 towards HANA S4HANA. So the S4HANA doesn't mean it has anything to do with the database HANA, except that it's their new system, which happens to often use HANA as their database system. But that's just the difference between the two names. Beyond the one-time license fee, there's another very important part of your agreement, though, and that is your annual recurring fee, your OPEX, your maintenance and support. And practically, this will also range. You have standard enterprise support. Usually what we've seen is the lowest range that I've come across for standard is 17% of your contract. For enterprise support, the highest I've seen is 23%. So quite a bad deal in that case. But it could be that they've negotiated, obviously, that you've negotiated different things in your contract, which reflects that increase or decrease. So standard versus enterprise, it is calculated on discounted list price. So you will always have to check in your own contract. And I would recommend, whenever you're looking at renegotiating a contract, because that's what we're talking about today, is focus on that annual recurring fee, because that is what SAP will do as well. Don't look at all of these new fancy licenses which SAP gives you for a discount. They know in the long run, it's the support where they get all their revenue from. So this is what they will be focusing on. So carrying on, a few things just to recap and focus on when it comes to negotiating this on-premise agreement. One, it never expires. As I already said, every detail will remain valid. Even terminated licenses, you might think, hey, we can forget Appendix 20 to 30 because it's been terminated. No, be careful, because it could be that you've got a definition in there which would still be valid. It's just the license that have been terminated, not necessarily all the wording. There is, of course, if you don't have the documents, you could see, but still, we would recommend keep everything and verify it. Two, because it never terminates, and that's what I said, their maintenance will grow in proportions. Many small changes add up to a very large amount, so focus on that maintenance and focus on even the small bits and pieces. Don't only take the big ticket items. Obviously, that's the quick wins, but even the small bits over time will add up and will give you that return on investment if you can drop them from your contract. And because also that the agreements never expire, always think about how do we renegotiate the entire agreement. And this will work both ways, and SAP will abuse this in negotiation. So keep that in mind, that as SAP, the reason they have these agreements that never expire and it's all one is that you can't say, hey, I'll just drop this product. They will make threats and say, oh, well, then just what do you want instead, is usually what they're going to say. They're never going to say, all right, just reduce your contract, be happy. It's going to be like, well, if you want to reduce your contract, sure, what do you want instead? Because otherwise you might use your maintenance, you might preferential maintenance percentage, you want to validate the entire agreement. Be careful with that when you're looking at that contract, and be aware that they will look at the entire contract and not just at that one bit. And the last bit is that because your agreements never expire, the definitions will not adjust to changing technology. This can be good or bad. In some cases, your definitions might be suited for old, but will actually be beneficial in the newer virtual or other environments. But just the other side as well, because your licenses might have been built pre-virtualization, for example, for CPU licenses, it could be that you're selling on the hook for a lot more than what you thought. So keep it in mind that that the agreement never changed, so it could have an impact on your negotiation. The other end of the spectrum, so besides on-prem, and nowadays I think pretty much everyone will have one of these agreements for at least a few products from SAP, is the cloud agreement. Now, this is a principle of similar build-up. You've got your base agreement, general terms and conditions, which will include pretty much the same language as that old on-premise agreement, except a bit more modernized. But the big difference here comes in the order forms, where they're usually limited by a subscription only, meaning that you will normally sign up for 1 to 5 years. In those order forms, you will say, all right, look, we'll just keep it onwards. And then every time the agreement ends, you need to renew it at the end of the term. In some cases, there is also an auto renewal, so do be careful. And if you are planning on ending a cloud agreement or negotiating it down, do double check what do you need to report to SAP. Do you need to just let them know, or does your agreement just allows you to expire, the licenses expire? Beyond subscription, they do nowadays have consumption based only as well. So this is a variable monthly fee. It will be based on usage, and it will be linked to very specific products and platforms. So this is just a big recap of what kind of contract should you find. Now, how do you actually understand this contract and improve it? So what we always recommend and how we approach this when it comes down to it is, one, collect every document you can possibly find. Doesn't matter how old, like I said, it could still be valid, but find everything that you can. Organize them based on dates, numbers, and that's the good thing of the old on-premise agreement. They usually will have your order 1, order 2, order 3, or appendix 3, and often there will be some bits where it doesn't make sense anymore, where they skip a number, and so onwards. But do organize everything and figure out how did the entire lifetime of your agreement come down to this moment, and what is in there. If you're missing an agreement, or if you're missing any document, if you're not in an audit, because then potentially you should be careful with this. But if you're just a regular time, you can request missing documents from SAP. They do provide as a service, so I would recommend anything you're missing, send something to your account manager and ask them about, hey, what's going on in order number 27, for example, and try to get a copy. In general, SAP has been pretty good in our experience in tracking those down. Once you've got every document, you go through them one by one, identify important clauses, try to understand the entire setup. See, for example, is there a flex agreement? Could be important for your negotiation. Maybe you'll find a clause which says you can reduce your user licenses once every 10 years or whatnot. So there's often, if you go through this, you'll find little bits and pieces that you can use as part of your negotiation, things that you can bring to SAP. So we would recommend to go through it entirely and try to make sense of it and see what can you use. Also, for example, if you're thinking about S/4HANA or digital access, the new topics where you plan to redesign your entire agreement, figure out how it is fit in with your old licenses, your old terms, your old conditions, because it could very well have an influence. And then as a last part, once you figure out how the agreement sort of works, get into the license number metrics so you know everything that's in there. Because because what often happens is if we go through a contract, is that we find these little pieces of licenses where we say, hey, what's going on with this? And you say, well, we don't think we own that anymore. But for some reason, you're still paying support for it, because it just happened to be one of these documents 10 years ago that you signed. It's been decommissioned, but you forgot to ever terminate it. So make sure you know every license, every metric. And this is what SAP does as well. If they do their audits, they will go through all these documents one by one and try to rebuild the entire history of your contract to see what's going on. Also, never trust that SAP did the right thing. Just the same, never trust consultants like us to do the right thing. These documents are so complex. almost every time if we put our numbers next to SAP, there's a few items where we disagree. Sometimes SAP is right and they had some more information. Sometimes we're right and we found some more information that just wasn't picked up. And the complexity is all that it comes into it. So this is a brief overview of how do you figure out your contract. So in the next step, you would end up with, all right, how do you then get to your usage? And for that, I'm going to give the word back to Jan. So just, there is ways to find your usage in a general way. You know, there's the law report, everything. And in an audit situation, this is everything you have to rely on, obviously. But there's quite a lot of restrictions. So I think having a tool or having something to make sense of all of that definitely makes sense. So Jan, feel free to take it from here. I think you're muted.
Indeed. Thank you, Hans. Yeah, I was just mentioning that we do have some questions that have been presented, so we'll try and address those towards the end, so do bear with us. So I'm going to talk about know your usage and how to use usage data from SAP to try and form inputs to effective contract negotiations. Obviously, the way that we help customers and partners do that is by measuring and optimizing software with our SAMQ solution. So I will go through usage-based inputs to contract negotiation. I guess first of all, we'll take a quick overview of the licensing basics. So you do need a package license for every software product you want to use. That package license entitles you to deploy and use specific software functionality. And you do need a user license for users of that software. So a user license will entitle users to deploy and use specific licensed software. This remains generally correct with a few notable exceptions, like, for example, if you license CRM, you don't need any additional user licensing for that particular solution. You have things like digital access, which is a document-based licensing model, but that can be licensed either in parallel or in addition or separately to the package and user licensing based model. And obviously you've got subscription based models for cloud products and cloud services. With regards to indirect use, here's the world's most simplified illustration of that. You've got SAP ERP and an indirect user who's using SAP ERP via a third-party application that has been interfaced to SAP. According to legacy contracts or legacy licensing models, it doesn't matter whether a user is using SAP directly or indirectly, and the wording does include that regardless of the technical interface chosen, whether it's direct or indirect, a user, if they are using SAP directly or indirectly, would need a user license. And furthermore, if that third-party application is triggering certain functionality in SAP ERP, you would need the respective package license for the software product that's been accessed or the functionality that's been used within SAP. Indirect access is typically licensed via the named user and package, but customers do now, as of 2018, they have the option to switch to SAP's new digital access licensing model. So if they've subscribed to that, indirect usage would be licensed on a document basis, and traditional direct access would continue to be licensed via the user and package dual licensing principle. And in terms of indirect access, so the digital document licensing model, that's based on chargeable digital documents, and that could be sales, purchasing, invoice, manufacturing, material quality, maintenance, finance, and time entry documents. So indirect usage is charged according to the creation of these chargeable document types, and named user licenses and package licenses would no longer be required in any way to license indirect use. So how to identify usage? Well, it is worth knowing that what you do get from LAW and what you would get if you had a SAM tool or a software asset management tool installed on your environment to give you live on-demand data about your systems, your licensing, and your compliance. So at a glance, LAW can't help you right size your user population, whereas a SAM tool can help you identify inactive users. For example, LAW will still report that an inactive user is consuming a license, and that would be because the customer hasn't expired the user correctly. So it'd be an administrative error. LAW still counts the user, whereas SAMQ would identify that issue, would expire the user, and thus the right number of user licenses would be licensed and measured. LAW provides no opportunity to optimize user classifications. It merely reads or examines the classifications that have been made. If SAMQ is classifying users, then LAW would be extracting information based on how SAMQ is classifying users, and it would be doing that optimally. Active remediation of user configuration issues. I mean, SAMQ gives you on-demand visualization of engines. It can help you customize engine measurements to the metrics in your contract. It reports on indirect access activity. It can help measure chargeable digital documents. It has a user-friendly interface, whereas LAW is very difficult unless you're an expert on working with LAW data. Really, it's a report or a data format that's used for SAP auditors, so it isn't customer-friendly data. A SAM tool can help you model things like S/4HANA user types. LAW doesn't, and various other things. So the point is that if you're running a tool on your estate, you have a lot of data there at your fingertips that can help you plan for and make sure that you're actually negotiating an optimized new contract. It gives you all the information you need regarding how you're using and deploying the software and the level of compliance or the extent to which you're using these products. And that can be very helpful in not only understanding where you are today, but understanding what improvements you can make in your contract if you go down the route of renegotiating that with SAP. So to give you some quick examples, here's some data according to LAW in a customer's contract, consuming 4.5 million worth of user licenses. This is after SAMQ optimization. So SAMQ has optimized the configuration of users and the classification or assignment of licenses in the systems, and that's brought consumption down to 3.5 million. So we've already reduced the consumption of user licenses by 1.8 million. Here's the conversion of user licenses to the S/4HANA user license types. With S/4HANA, things like time entry only users no longer need a license, so we can reduce the number of users to be licensed. And again, we can the use rights for each of the S/4HANA user types are more extensive. So again, you can optimize further how users are licensed and further reduce the amount or the level of user license consumption in the new contract. So that 2.4 million gives you something to aim for. So that's how you'd want to right size the new agreement. If you're doing a pure contract conversion, for example, into S/4HANA, if you've got 5 million worth of license assets, but you only need 2.4 in the new contract, then that 2.9 million of unused user licenses, or that it's now unnecessary or unneeded entitlement. When you're doing contract conversion, you can convert that into new products, for example, that you can make use of. So currently the customer is wasting that entitlement. By optimizing, they can then convert that entitlement into new products, and that helps them satisfy future demand or innovation or rollout or digital transformation into new SAP solutions. So in total, when you're looking at packages and engine licensing, the objectives for that would be to optimize the bill of material. So you want to have only the products you need licensed, and you want to have each product licensed to the correct level. The prerequisites for that are to have an accurate and up-to-date bill of material for your SAP agreement. You want to have information on all the licensed products, the SKU, material number, license metrics, blocks, units, quantities, and you want to form an ELP with usage measurements for all those licensed products. And the reason for that is what you have licensed is one thing, but what you're using is another, and it's what you're using that you want to actually take with you, and you want to leave other stuff behind. You want to get rid of legacy products or surplus license assets. So you do need to know how you're using those licensed products, and you do need to know what it is that you want to aim for in the future. So here's an example of a bill of material document. Here we've segmented the licenses into users. We've segmented all products into compliant engines, out of compliance engines, and engines that are not in use. And of course, why would you want to continue paying maintenance on products that are not in use? If you can take advantage of contract conversion, for example, you would be able to plan a completely new S/4HANA bill of material, and those products can then be converted into new contract entitlement for your S/4HANA agreement, and that would be new products that you could deploy and make use of in the future. So again, very important to understand what products you're using within the entitlement. Here we've got 4 products that are at risk, so those are out of compliance engines. And when we negotiate that new agreement, we would actually need to mitigate those risks by making purchases of additional blocks of entitlement. So we need to license those products up to a compliant level, and we'd have to apply demand planning principles to understand what license level we need to satisfy us today and potentially the next 3 to 5 years of our SAP usage. So again, all these things factor in to negotiating a completely commercially optimal contract that keeps you also compliant. This is an example of a purchase history. So we have all the products licensed down the left, and across the top we have all the order forms in chronological order. Now, where this becomes important is if you marry this up with your bill of material, you can actually look at all your products that are not in use, and you can identify which order form they belong to. And now you can specifically start to target order forms for potential termination. So each order form is a contract to buy a certain bill of material of licenses. What you'll notice is that each order form has its own contract for support and maintenance. So the support and maintenance value for each order form will be designated in that order. Your maintenance bill any given year, you'll notice that that bill will itemize each and every single licensing contract that you have or order form that you have that makes up your SAP agreement. So at any time, if you're not using those licenses anymore, you can look to, it's a very difficult and very technical exercise to go through this kind of thing, looking at this product segmentation and mapping it to order forms and looking at what licenses or orders you can terminate. For example, if you want to terminate order form 10 and there is a product in that you need to keep, you can consider terminating it and buying that product back at today's prices. Or you could do strategically, you could incorporate that purchase into another planned purchase to make sure you benefit from volumes of scale. So there are things that you can do, whether you are simply looking to cut cost or whether you're looking to plan a new bill of material for S/4HANA, so what you want rid of and what it is exactly that you want to take with you or convert into new S/4HANA entitlements. So what we need to do, we need to segment. So this applies to any contract negotiation. You have to have your bill of material and your ELP data ready and all your products properly segmented. So you need to understand what is in use and out of use. In use products need to be marked as whether or not they are compliant, out of compliant, over licensed, and to what extent. So the variance between the usage level or the license level. For example, if you're licensed for 10 blocks of a certain product, but you're only consuming 6 blocks of entitlement, then you are 4 blocks over licensed. So it's about documenting the usage level and the variance in terms of the license metrics for that product. Out of use products, we do need to understand if that product has never been used. If it's never been used, you're more likely to get credit for that product. If a product is out of support, SAP can no longer charge you support maintenance fees on that product. So it's very important to look at legacy products and understand if they are no longer being supported or not. And we need to look at products that are out of use because they have been bought to satisfy a future product. project, because these products would be rolled out in the future, and we certainly don't want to get rid of them. For S/4HANA, this is even more important because you want to map products respectively. You want to look if a product has a compatibility pack, if it has a cloud conversion opportunity. Excuse me a moment. Sorry, everyone, just clearing my throat. Yes, so we need to understand what products we're mapping to what are compatibility relevant products, what are cloud conversion products, and what credit we can potentially get for new products. Here's an example of a demand planning exercise. So as well as looking at what we've got, what we want to keep, what we want to get rid of, we have to do demand planning to understand what new products we need to incorporate into the new bill of material. So here's an example from a real contract negotiation that we've done, where the customer wanted to purchase an additional 1.3 million worth of products. The great news for this customer was that that was covered by products, legacy products in the contract. So they were able to do a kind of like-for-like contract conversion, where demand for new software was covered by products that were terminated in the old agreement, and therefore they were able to optimize. The value of the contract did go up. They did end up spending more money with SAP. They did have a bigger bill of material after the negotiation, but that bill of material was optimized. It was commercially optimized. And when you do that, the respective annual support and maintenance payments will also be optimized for that new contract. So how do you get the best deal from SAP? So once you've gathered all your usage information, so you know your contracts, you know all your products, to what extent you're using them, you understand whether you want to get rid of a product, you understand what order forms they belong to, and can you terminate order forms, can you terminate the components of support on products that are out of support or legacy products. You've mapped them to the respective S/4HANA price list, and you know what your new bill of material is going to be. So once you have all that data at your fingertips, you're now able to go into and approach that that contract negotiation. So back to you, Hans, for a bit more insight on that.
Yeah, all right. Thanks for that. So good information. And as Jan says, once you've got all the information, how do you approach it? So first of all, your on-premise agreement, as said, it's no fixed term, so it can be very difficult to open negotiation. A lot of customers we have say, oh, well, we can't do it. But obviously, it is possible. There is always negotiation space. Usually, you have to think about when you're ending or transitioning or something is going on. It's always a good point to then bring something else into it and bring that entire contract into it. Because obviously, if there's a bigger fish on the hook, they might be more easy to discuss other things. So first of all, look into beneficial wording. So check, have you got flex, exchange, reduction clauses, which you could use. Maybe check the old metrics to see what's going on there. Can you maybe reuse those instead of using the new license that SAP wants to tell you? Second bit is, and something that has been very more relevant to SAP nowadays, as they've seen the competition increase, is that your licenses are perpetual in an on-premise agreement. You don't technically need support. Now, obviously, for a lot of you, as you're moving to S/4HANA, you're probably going to want to keep that, because if you're going to S/4HANA, they will and you end your contract, it might actually backfire if you then have to go back to them and say, now we want to buy S/4HANA, because they'll say, well, then you've lost your preferential pricing in the previous contract. But even that could work out in the benefit. But third-party maintenance is available. If you just say, we want to cut costs and we want to get rid of SAP, that could be a solution. But it is always depending, obviously. And the last bit is, SAP is pushing to sell S/4HANA, HANA in general, their cloud platform. So even though they might say, hey, they will always try to get a 10% increase of your contract, but that doesn't mean you have to agree to it. They actually want it as well, because it's good for their figures if more people change into that new system, the new agreement. So do use that to your advantage. Then in the other end, we've got cloud. So what do you want to do specifically for cloud? So there, every time an end of term approaches, and when approaches, I mean, ideally you think about it at least half a year, if not more in advance, look into that. So one point is, it is always easier to increase a subscription compared to reducing it. So we'd always recommend, even if SAP offers you a big volume discount, it can still be better to first buy a small amount for testing, because usually that testing phase will take another year, and you will be paying that support or that subscription for that entire year for all the licenses, even though you might just use 1%. On the other hand as well is that if you have already agreed to this very big amount, SAP has no more reason to actually support you actively to a very big degree, and actually support you in making this a success story. So this, if they have that very big deal looming in a year, they might help you more in getting that cloud product up and running, making sure it works well. For cloud agreement as well, is that while often this is negotiated separately, it could actually be beneficial to link this together with all your other agreements. If the new cloud deal is on the line, they might actually be more flexible to negotiate other bits. And the last item for cloud that we always recommend is be very careful of usage creep, because it's in the cloud and it's so easy to just add in usage, adding users, adding functionality. It is very easy to just keep expanding, but actually look into, is everyone using that software? Can you not reduce it? And beyond just cloud and on-premise, on the next slide, and I see that it's not skipping. Yeah, there we go. So in the overall, also be aware, so one thing is you're usually not negotiating with the German giant SAP, but you're negotiating with your account manager and his boss, probably. This annual bonus could depend on the deal with you. So don't just think that you're a small puppet compared to them. They're also a smaller fish in the SAP pool. So always keep that in mind and know who you're negotiating with. It is not the entire company. It is that guy, and he needs to have his own bonus as well. We focus also, besides just the price, on the wording, because even though you might think, hey, that £1,000 we can reduce, or even that £100,000 could be very important, but actually having a beneficial license metric, having a usage reduction clause in a year, or having some simplified termination, limited price increases, could be much more valuable in the longer run than saving that bit of money in your current negotiation. And as a last piece of advice there, in general, is SAP won't hesitate to call your CEO or CIO, CFO. It depends who they can get a hand on. If they see that that is slipping, and if you're negotiating too much, it could be that in a backroom deal over golf, they will agree over something else anyway and do that. So be prepared for that. Make sure that your manager is in the loop, is on board with your negotiation strategy, and everyone is on the same page. And always, whenever you negotiate a very good deal, if you play very hard and if you actually reduce your contract, be prepared for a hard audit. SAP will always try to make up for any lost revenue. So I think we're already running pretty much out of time, but let's see if we go to the next slide. So very briefly on S/4HANA. So first of all, as already mentioned, the difference between HANA and S/4HANA, keep that in mind. Know what you're negotiating, whether or not you're negotiating your entire ERP system, or if you're only looking to get a new database. It is, a very different opportunity, of course. And as if you're negotiating S/4HANA, it is the entire system that you're doing. So make sure you're not just negotiating the contract, but you actually got a very good plan on how you're going to implement it, because it will have a big impact on a lot of S/4HANA. People negotiate a good deal, get all new software, and 2 years later you have to put it all into the bin again because their implementation failed. So watch out for that. And then as a last topic for me, and I'll just let Jan close it down, is digital access. So be very careful of that as well. What is going on there is, it is a very complicated story. So make sure you are prepared. Make sure you figured out whether or not the new document structure is beneficial to you, because there's a lot of differences coming in there. Yeah, I'll let you close it down.
I mean, this can be another input to the contract negotiations. So, for example, you have to understand existing indirect usage. You have to identify unlicensed indirect usage and understand whether you do or don't have any existing risk exposure. And then if you have the data regarding how many digital documents you are producing, you then have data available to understand which way of mitigating that risk would be most cost effective. So for example, for certain third-party application deployments, digital document licensing might be cheaper, and therefore to mitigate the risk, you might want to negotiate digital document licensing entitlements. During those kind of negotiations, you can actually trade packages and user licenses that were relevant for indirect usage. You can actually convert those existing entitlements into digital document licenses, so you're not dual licensing that particular type of usage, but you do need to have the data available to help you understand how you negotiate a new contract that has the right licensing model for you, that mitigates any risk exposure and helps you license any particular type of usage the most cost optimal way. You can incorporate that into that future forecast demand planning. So if you're looking to innovate and deploy lots of third-party integrations like RPA and IoT, then you might then want to look at the licensing impact of that. And again, you might decide that document-based licensing might be cheaper, for your future business use case. So again, when you review that contract negotiation scenario, that's something you'd want to look at as something that's going to provide you with suitable licensing to protect that kind of that future business use case. And of course, it all comes down to TCO and cost analysis. So when comparing the two, whether you license indirect use fee, user and package, or digital documents, it's all about doing the TCO analysis and finding out which is actually the most cost effective for your business. This is an example, and very quickly, for those who are still online, we still have the majority of people online, so we'll go through it quickly. This is an example where we did a user and an engine based analysis, and the customer's total risk exposure was 3.7 million. We did an analysis of the same usage, licensing via digital documents, and found that the total licensing cost would be about £1 million. They had about 500,000 worth of licenses that had previously been purchased or had been purchased and were relevant for indirect usage. So in fact, by trading those for digital document licenses and making up a further 500k shortfall, that customer's actual spend was reduced to £500,000. So that was a great way for them to mitigate what was an existing 3.7 million risk. So it really, that's just, I'm just giving you a real life example there of how actually doing the analysis and having the data and looking at the license models for those for any given respective type of usage. You have to do the analysis and understand what is the best solution for your business in the future. Here's some assets from a contract negotiation. So here we can see 60% of the contract value is associated with the top 5 licensed products. So why would we want to know that? Well, we need to understand which areas of the business are spending money. We can focus on the highest value products for negotiation. And for these products, we can include price and discount protection for the future. Because they're expensive and costing us a lot of money, we want to protect our buying power for future investments or expansion of our use or purchase of those specific products. And here's a TCO analysis example. We're looking at A, B, C, and D scenarios. So that's looking at various different blends of cloud and on-premise products. It can be legacy versus digital document licensing for indirect use. And we can also model the contract cost when we include or exclude certain cloud products, or in this case, the customer was including or excluding IBP. and we look at what it's going to cost us over 5 years, and we can choose the proper respective scenario. This customer chose scenario D, even though it's more expensive than scenario A, but scenario A involved not purchasing any digital access documents. That would have left them exposed. So scenario D was in fact the most cost-effective way of negotiating a new contract and mitigating existing licensing risks, whilst giving them all the products and entitlements they needed to go on and satisfy their 3 to 5 year roadmap. So I have to say, everyone, sorry if the express finished, but thank you for watching. I can see in the panel that Hans has tried to work through answering some of your questions, as have I. So if you received a question, hopefully it was satisfactory, but you can touch base with either of us following the webinar and ask us any further questions. Any that we haven't answered, we will endeavour to contact you directly and provide you with an answer to your question, so don't feel left out. Previous slide, if you want to keep up to date with VOQUZ Labs, you can check out our LinkedIn page. So that's VOQUZ Labs on LinkedIn, and you can follow us to keep up to date with various different articles and announcements. Same goes for FisherITS. You can find them on LinkedIn, where they advertise all their events and online content, and great way to keep up to date with all software asset management and ITAM related topics. So thanks once again. These are our contact details, so you can get in touch with Hans at Fisher. Is hmurkens@fisherits.com. You can contact me, email me anything you want to discuss or any questions you have, jan.cook@voquz.com. And once again, anything else you want to add to that, Hans?
No, I think that covers it quite well. I'm just responding to a couple of questions still as we have it open.
Yeah, so sorry
Thank
for
you
not
as
being
well,
able
Jan,
to.
for having us in.
Yeah, so sorry again for not being able to read out the questions live, but if you've asked one, hopefully you got a satisfactory answer to your question. So that's that wraps up today's webinar. Look out for the next events coming soon, and thanks all for attending.